We're here with Josh Seiden. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Oh, well, thanks for having me.
And I'm going to use my little teleprompter here to ask you the first question. Why is it so hard for people to do UX research?
Well, I think, first of all, I don't think it's hard for everyone to do it.
Okay.
Right? I think that there are people who love to do it, and those are people who have the title researcher. Right?
I hope so. I hope they love it.
I mean, it's a self-selecting group, right? People
Yeah.
who love it are more likely to do it professionally. I think the question is, why is it hard for people who are not professionals to do it? And then the sort of related question is, why is it hard for people who don't do it to sponsor it, right? So there's sort of doing it yourself, why is that hard, and why is it hard to be a sponsor or consumer of research, right? I do a lot of work with entrepreneurs, and I do a lot of coaching with them about how they can do research themselves. And I think there are a couple of resistances. One is that it's a skill that needs to be learned, and we don't like to be bad at things, right? So, you have to, when you're doing it for the first time, you have to just deal with the fact that you're going to be bad at it, right? And that it will get better. It's not that hard, but you have to learn how to do it. So that's one resistance, right, is that it's a skill that needs to be learned. And the second resistance is that we are shy, and we worry about that interaction with people, right? We worry that we're going to be rude by asking direct questions, right? And one of the things that we discover, the people that I coach discover when they do research, is that for people who are research participants, most of them, it's an opportunity for them to talk about their life and their opinions in a way that they don't normally get to do. So for most people, participating in the kind of research that we do is actually fun. But it's hard to know that before you start doing that, right? You think, oh, I'm going to be amputating people's fingers, and they're going to be unhappy with me, right? And I think the really deep reason is that that UX research is hard, is that we are going to seek an answer about something that we've been working on and something that we're very passionate about, right? We have an idea, we think that's a great idea, and we're going to go out in the field and we're going to talk to people about it, and there's potential to discover that our baby is ugly, right? That we're wrong.
So it's almost, you need some level of, strong, level of humility.
Yeah.
To accept the fact that your baby might be ugly.
Well, I try and reframe it with the entrepreneurs that I work with to say, this is an opportunity to make our work better.
Yeah.
Right? So as opposed to saying this is an opportunity to encounter failure, right? This is an opportunity to seek success, right? And to say, okay, the idea, it might be good or it might be bad, it doesn't matter, but at the end of this process, the idea is going to be better, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think if you reframe it that way, and if you really believe it, and I really do, and if they can believe that, I think you can get past that.
All right, you've mentioned entrepreneurs, and startup founders have all kinds of questions in early stages, questions about their customers, questions about their business. What are the most important questions they have that can be answered with user experience research, in your opinion?
So, I think there are sort of categories of questions that we can go into as researchers, or as anybody who's building a product, right? Mm-hmm. There's sort of these big buckets of questions. There's, is there a need or an opportunity in the market, right? Will people buy my solution, right? So I've discovered a need, and now I'm putting forth a solution, and will people buy it? Do they want it? And then the third big bucket is, can they use my solution? Okay. Right? And I think, you sent me these questions in advance, and I was thinking about those questions and sort of what's the most important one. And what I was thinking on the way here this morning is that in some ways the most important questions are the ones you don't know to ask. And I think that's really the interesting thing that happens when you're in the field doing research, is your sort of perfect model of the universe gets disrupted, and you discover the way people really think, and that is such an important part of product development, is to sort of and such really the critical thing of research is changing your frame of reference from this is what I think about the world to, oh, wait a minute, that's how they think about the world. Mm-hmm. So I think in every stage of your inquiry, in some ways the most important questions are the ones that you didn't know to ask, right? And that, I think, is what you discover when you get out there in the field.
So I asked this question and I hoped for this answer because I read one of your posts, I don't know how many, some time ago. And it really made me think. So it's easy to deal with, the needs question. We know how to answer these questions. I mean, it's not easy to answer. We know what the questions are. We have some techniques to answer those types of questions. We have a lot of problem persuading people that these will, give the answer, give the right answer, give the answer on time, and things like that. But we know how to deal with that. And then there's the can they use it part, which is also something that was, discussed on and on, over and over again.
Right, that's classic usability research.
I mean, we know how to do that.
We know how to do that.
That's easy. I mean,
yeah.
That's, anyone can do that. There comes the burger part. You called it, would they buy it? I like to say, would they, would people desire it? Would they care? How do we find answers to these questions? That's hard.
It is hard. It is hard, and so I mean, I remember first sort of encountering this problem in the 90s doing usability studies for clients, and the clients always say, ask them if they would buy it, right? And if you're a researcher, right, that if you ask that question, whoever you ask will answer it, but the answer will be meaningless because they're just trying to make you happy, and it's not a predictor of what they'll actually do in the world.
It happened to me last week. Why 90s?
Right. So I think that the only way to answer that question, the predictive question, right, of will they purchase this thing, right, is not to ask people directly, right, but is to measure behavior, and specifically to measure behavior that is a proxy for the purchase, right? So, in other words, put something out in the world, mm-hmm. and ask people to do an action that would indicate that, well, first of all, you could just ask them to buy it, right? You put an early version of your product up and put a buy now button and just see if they click it. I think that for me, the answers to this question have started to emerge out of the lean startup movement,
yep.
right? Where entrepreneurs are launching early incomplete versions of their product, which they often call MVPs, right? Specifically to test whether people will buy the product, right? And so there's a whole category now of products that do this for you, right? So there's Launch Rock, yep. and there's Unbounce, that whole category of what are called landing pages, right? Where you put up a page where you're measuring people's interest, right? And so I think those categories where you're testing to see if people will buy, mm-hmm. by giving them the opportunity to buy or giving them the opportunity to do something that is a proxy for that purchase, I think that's really the only meaningful way to answer that question.
I'm hearing from UX people who think about working with startups that startups think they know everything, that it's very hard to work with them. What are your thoughts about this?
Well, I think it's a really tough job to be a startup founder. It's you're making something out of nothing. So part of your role is to be really to sort of stand very powerfully behind your vision, and to be very persuasive about your vision. at the same time, leading with vision, that leadership requires a certain amount of humility to be continually learning, right, and adjusting as you go towards your vision.
Mm-hmm.
And so that balance of vision and humility and learning is a very difficult one to master. And so I have a lot of sympathy for startup founders. Which is not to say that all of them are equally good, right?
Yeah.
Right. It's very rare when you meet a leader who's both powerful and humble, right? So the flip side of that is as a user experience person and as a researcher, right? You have a client, right? You either have an explicit client or you're working on the startup team with the founder,
Mm-hmm.
and your job is to be credible and useful, right? And so there's a fine line there, right? There are founders who you can't work for, right?
Yeah.
Then that's sort of the reality, And then there are user experience people who just don't know how to collaborate. Right, that's the flip side, and so at the end of the day, for me, especially in an early stage small startup, the key skill is beyond all technical knowledge. The key skill is being able to collaborate as a team, right? And so I think that saying startup founders are difficult to work with, like. Okay, so what? Everybody can be difficult to work with, right? At the end of the day, the question is, what can you do to create a good collaboration with the founder, with the other members of the team? And I think the first answer is deliver value.
All right. What do you usually recommend to startup teams in very early stages who want to have an excellent design?
I guess I'm laughing because I don't know that that's a useful goal.
Okay.
Okay. I mean, and I say that as a user experience designer who values great design.
All right.
I think that as an early stage startup, it's going to be very, very difficult to do everything beautifully and everything well, right? You have to pick your battles, and so I think it's important to be out in the market and figuring out what your particular population of customer and user needs. And what your particular value proposition is going to be, right? And so when you say when a startup team says design is really important to us, we need a great user experience, right?
They heard it somewhere.
Right. It's sort of, well, yes, and so is world peace, right? It's sort of like, well, what does that mean to you, right? What are you willing to put on the line for that? And so I think what I try to do with teams is to say, like, okay, that's great. Take that as a starting point that says we're willing to do what it takes, and then to sort of start to work to say, okay, well, let's look at the outcomes that you seek, right, and let's optimize the design effort around those outcomes, right? So if your outcome is to gain awareness in a certain population, right? Well, some populations you might do that by making your application beautiful, right? Some populations you might do that by making your application provide a service that's easier than any other version of that service, right? Both of those are design aspects, right? But one is the sort of traditional, like surface, glorious, beautiful design, and another is sort of the design is how it works version of design, right? And so I think it depends a lot on the audience that a team is going for. So my answer, I guess, to you is an answer for designers rather than for startup teams. And the answer for designers is work with your clients to understand what aspect of great design your client actually needs, as opposed to trying to hit every element.
All right. My last question is also about startups, and I want to say a little bit about, talk a little bit about why I'm picking up on startups.
Yeah.
So I love working with startups, and I've had some opportunities to do that in the past, 2-3 years, since the lean startup, I don't even know how to call this, movement, approach, started booming. And I really liked that because I thought that, what the thought leaders of this movement are talking about is exactly what UX people talked about, 30, 40 years ago. Only now people listen. and the people who listen, and I see that as a great thing. I mean, some people, take this and they don't listen to us and blah, blah. I'm happy about that. And I think the audience that started listening, obviously, are startups. And my impression is that they never listened, to UX people before that. And I see that as a great opportunity. And I take that as an example of an audience that probably never heard or was never interested in UX, and now they are interested. Even if it's for the wrong reasons, they're now interested. And it's an opportunity for us to to make a difference, because there are people who never heard about us, and they don't care about us, but they want to do what we do on their own, and I think that's great. So that said, a question I've been asked many times before. Now I know not to answer it because I get into fights. So no, but you can do whatever you want, and nobody here is going to fight with you. When should a startup hire their first UX person?
Yeah. So I think the way I understand what you said, the way I think about the lean startup movement is that one of the things that we've taken for granted in the last 20 years in user experience design is this foundation of being user-centered, right? Before user experience became kind of the umbrella under which we operated, the umbrella was user-centered design, UCD. And I think what's really interesting about lean startup is it says I don't know that it exactly says this explicitly, but it's core to the lean startup movement is that it's user-centered business design, right? It's about putting user-defined value as opposed to shareholder value or some other kind of value. It's about putting user-defined value at the core of what you're doing in your startup. So that user-centered thinking is really, that's the commonality between the entrepreneurs, the startup, let's call it trend of the moment.
Yeah. And Josh Seiden, thank you very much for joining me today.
Oh, well, thanks for having me.